Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday School with Minister Abram Davis. We are going to continue with Casket Empty. Today we are on A for Abraham. Remember, Casket Empty stands for creation, Abraham, Sinai, kingdom, exile, temple for the Old Testament, expectation, Messiah, Pentecost, teaching, and yet to come for the New Testament. And the reason for understanding Casket Empty is to tell the one story of redemption from Genesis to Revelation. Last week, we ended with creation, and we were left asking the question, what is God to do to get everything back to chapter 1 of Genesis? Allow us to take a look at Abraham, which is known as the history of the patriarchs. You probably heard the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the patriarchs, and we're going to start with Abraham. The call of Abraham starts in chapter 12, where he is told to leave his family to go into a place that God is going to show him later. The interesting thing about the first 3 verses in chapter 12 is that we are told that it is through Abraham's seed that the whole world is going to be blessed. Now, seed can be plural or singular, and you may want to ask yourself, in this context, is seed being used in a plural form or in a singular form? You'll have to continue to listen to our Casket Empty discussions to find out. But chapter 12 is the beginning of the covenant with Abraham, and these covenants continue. We're going to now jump up to chapter 15, where God makes another covenant with Abraham. Now, in the ancient Near Eastern context, a covenant is usually between 2 or more parties. But in chapter 15, the covenant is made with God himself. There's nothing required of Abraham but to simply believe, which he does in verse 6, and it's accounted to him as righteousness. But all of the actions of the covenant is based on God alone. This is a most interesting aspect of this covenant, and we're going to see this come up later on. In chapter 15, it is also very interesting because God gives Abraham a glimpse of what is about to happen. Through Abraham, he is going to be blessed abundantly beyond measure, and through him, so many kings and rulers are going to come. But there's going to come a time when his descendants are going to be oppressed for over 400 years, but God is going to judge those that oppress his family. We're going to see that come up later on. It is also in chapter 15 that God states that through him children and rulers are going to come. So Abraham and his wife, he's Abram and his wife Sarah, decide to take matters in their own hand, and they decide to have Abram sleep with Hagar to have a child produced. Think of this as a earlier form of surrogate pregnancy, and that was the purpose of it. But this is not the plan that God had. Chapter 17, once again, God makes another profound covenant with Abram. And he says to him that you are no longer going to be called Abram, but you will be called Abraham, because you are going to be a ruler of many nations and a father of a multitude of nations. And he changes his name to Abraham. Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. And then there's a sign of this covenant, which is the circumcision. All right. Then in chapter 21, before I get there, there's something very interesting going on that we see in chapter 16, that they try to have a child, and that Sarah is barren. She's not able to give birth to a child. A woman's womb is known as a symbol of life. And if we look at what is going on with Abraham and with Sarah, there's no life that is being produced, and this is a rather dead situation, which is a perfect opportunity for God to show himself strong. In chapter 21, Sarah conceives and gives birth to a son. His name is Isaac. He is the son of promise, and his name in Hebrew literally means laughter and joy, because of the amount of joy that it brings to Abraham and Sarah that they finally have their child. Chapter 22 is a very interesting predicament, and that God comes to test the loyalty of Abraham to him and says that he needs to sacrifice his only son, it's viewed. That is, the only son of the promise. Of course, he gives birth to Ishmael earlier. So Abraham, the next morning, rises and goes to sacrifice his son. But he's stopped at the last minute by the angel and is shown that there is a ram in the bush, something else that will take the place of a sacrifice. Now, it is meant for the sacrifice to happen of a son, but it's not Abraham's son that will be the sacrifice. So we're going to speed up along into the book of Genesis, and Isaac gives birth. He gets married to Rebekah, who is also barren, but eventually she also gives birth to twins, Jacob and Esau. Jacob's name is changed to Israel after he strives with the angel of the Lord, and Esau, because he is hairy and red, has the nickname Edom. It is also Jacob, not Esau, that gets the promise. Now, he does it in a rather crafty way, which causes some tension between Jacob and Esau. But Israel is the son of promise, and he later on has 12 sons of his own. These will become the 12 tribes of Israel. In chapters 37 through 50 of Genesis, we're going to focus on Joseph, because Joseph is a very specially gifted young man with dreams and interpreting dreams. And this causes some tension between his brothers. He eventually gets sold into slavery into Egypt, where because of this gift and ability, he is able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams and become the second in command in Egypt. Long story short, because of the severe famine throughout the region, Israel sends his sons into Egypt in order to get some food for the famine. And this is a beautiful story of reconciliation and forgiveness, because Joseph reunites with his brothers, and the whole family of Israel moves into the Goshen Valley of Egypt, where they are viewed as family, as foreigners, but they are joyfully received because of the good things that Joseph has done. And this really concludes the part that we should go over concerning Abraham and Casket Empty. But I want to end Abraham with Exodus chapter 1, and we're going to take a look at verses 1 through 7. And we're going to look at this in the English Standard Version. And it says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful, and increased greatly, and multiplied, and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them." And what we see is some of the very same language that is used in creation in chapter 1. And that here is the chosen family of God, exceedingly growing and swarming throughout. However, they are oppressed, as God mentioned to Abraham. And then we are told in Exodus chapter 1, then God remembered his servant Abraham, and he decides to do something about it. And that takes us into Sinai. Come back and join us next week.